History is terrible at keeping its timeline straight. In this video, we're looking at 32 things that showed up way earlier than they had any business showing up, from ancient batteries and vending machines to surgery, fast food, and sunglasses. Some of these are impressive, some are ridiculous, and a few make modern humans look embarrassingly late to the party. 1. Everyone gives Alessandro Volta the shiny inventor crown for the battery in 1800. Fair enough. But then archaeologists found a weird little clay pot near Baghdad that basically said, hold on, we may have done this 2,000 years earlier. The so-called Baghdad battery was a jar with a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and an asphalt seal. Pour in something acidic like vinegar or grape juice, and it produces a small electric current. Not enough to power a city, obviously, but enough to make this whole story deeply annoying for the official timeline. These objects date from roughly 200 BCE to 200 CE, and nobody agrees on what they were for. Jewelry plating, ritual shock effects, scroll storage, pick your favorite theory. The funniest part is that the battery works, yet the people who may have built it left us absolutely no instructions. Ancient Mesopotamia might have discovered electricity early, and then just shrugged. 2. Fast food feels like something invented when cars, suburbs, and terrible life choices all joined forces. But ancient Pompeii had the concept figured out long before drive-through windows existed. The city was packed with places called thermopolia, basically Roman snack bars built right into the street. They had counters with large clay containers sunk into them, keeping food warm and ready for anyone who needed lunch 5 minutes ago. And people really did need that, because many Roman apartments had no proper kitchens. Setting fires inside crowded buildings made about as much sense then as it does now. So ordinary Romans ate out constantly. These places served stews, grains, wine, and cheap hot meals for working people on the move. Archaeologists found more than 80 in Pompeii alone. So yes, 20 centuries before modern fast food chains, Romans were already grabbing a quick hot meal and moving on with their day. 3. History loves making simple things look late and complicated things look early. Fire starters are a perfect example. You would assume matches came first because they are literally sticks. Wrong. The lighter showed up before the match because history enjoys trolling us. In 1823, German chemist Johann Wolfgang Dobereiner created a device that made fire using zinc, sulfuric acid, and platinum. You pressed a lever, hydrogen gas formed, and the platinum triggered ignition. It sounds less like a household tool and more like a chemistry lab having an emotional breakdown. But it worked. The catch was that it was expensive, delicate, and not exactly pocket-friendly. Practical friction matches did not become commercially useful until the 1830s. So for a while, if you wanted instant fire, your options were old-school sparks or a miniature scientific drama sitting on your table. The humble match came later, which feels rude. 4. Odometers seem like pure car technology. You expect them to live behind dashboards next to warning lights you ignore. But the Greeks and Romans had the idea more than 2,000 years ago, and honestly, their version was wonderfully extra. The design is usually linked to Vitruvius, sometimes Archimedes because, of course, the exact credit is blurry. The basic system used a cartwheel connected to gears inside a box. After enough rotations to equal 1 Roman mile, the mechanism dropped a pebble into a container. At the end of the trip, you counted the pebbles and knew exactly how far you had gone. No electricity, no screen, no battery anxiety. Just gears, gravity, and rocks doing accounting. The Romans needed accuracy for surveying and road building, and they got it with a glorified mechanical snack dispenser for pebbles. Sometimes the ancient world solved problems so elegantly, it becomes genuinely irritating. 5. Ancient Egyptian women had a pregnancy test, and it sounds like a prank until you realize it actually worked. The method was simple. Urinate on wheat and barley seeds. If they sprouted, pregnancy was likely. If the wheat grew first, that supposedly meant a girl. If the barley won the race, that meant a boy. Now, the baby prediction part was basically astrology for grain, so let us stay calm. But the pregnancy part was not complete nonsense. In 1963, modern researchers tested the method and found it was around 70% accurate at detecting pregnancy. The hormones in pregnant urine can genuinely encourage seed growth. So 4,000 years ago, Egyptian women had a working home test involving crop science and patience. Meanwhile, modern people wave a plastic stick around like civilization just reached its peak. The ancient world may have lacked pharmacies, but it was not exactly guessing in the dark. 6. Chewing gum feels very modern, like something born in a factory and sold beside energy drinks. But humans were chewing random stuff thousands of years before branding departments existed. Archaeologists in Scandinavia found lumps of birch bark, pitch with clear tooth marks, some dating back about 5,000 years. This was a sticky tar-like substance probably used as glue, which means Stone Age people looked at construction material and thought, yes, but what if I chew it? The reasons could have included entertainment, dental cleaning, or just killing hunger. Then, the story got even stranger. In 2019, scientists extracted a complete human genome from a piece of chewed birch pitch found in Denmark. From one ancient wad, they learned it came from a woman with dark skin, dark hair, and blue eyes who had recently eaten duck and hazelnuts. Modern gum barely leaves flavor for 5 minutes. Ancient gum gave us a person. 7. Flush toilets feel like one of those achievements civilization had to crawl towards slowly, through centuries of bad smells and terrible decisions. Apparently not. The Indus Valley. Civilization had this sorted around 2600 BCE. In cities like Mohenjo-Daro, homes had bathrooms, toilets, and drainage systems that carried waste into covered street drains. Not palaces. Regular houses. Nearly every home had access to sanitation that would have made much later societies weep with envy. The drains were carefully sloped so waste kept moving, and some even had inspection points for maintenance, because these people were not guessing. This was happening while Stonehenge was still being assembled, and the Egyptian pyramids were basically the hot new thing. Then the civilization declined, and large parts of humanity seemed to forget how plumbing should work. For centuries afterward, people went back to living like sanitation was a rumor. The Indus Valley had already solved the problem, and then history misplaced the manual. 8. Plastic surgery sounds like modern medicine mixed with vanity, celebrity panic, and expensive consultations. But ancient India was doing serious reconstructive surgery around the 6th century BCE. A physician named Sushruta described techniques for rebuilding noses using skin taken from the patient's forehead, a method so smart that modified versions still exist today. And there was a grim reason nose repair mattered so much. In ancient India, cutting off someone's nose could be used as punishment for crimes or adultery, which created a very real demand for reconstruction. Sushruta did not stop there. His medical writings describe hundreds of surgical procedures, including cataract operations and cesarean deliveries. He used wine to dull pain and even used ants to clamp wounds shut. While parts of the world were still blaming everything on mysterious bodily imbalances, Indian surgeons were doing work a modern doctor would instantly recognize. Ancient medicine was sometimes far more advanced than people like to admit. 9. High heels were not invented so people could wobble dramatically at fancy events. They started as military gear, which is much funnier. In the 10th century, Persian cavalry riders used raised heels to help keep their feet locked into stirrups while firing arrows on horseback. Turns out trying to shoot accurately while sliding around in your shoes is not ideal. The heel gave stability, control, and a better chance of not dying embarrassingly. Then Persian culture influenced European elites in the 17th century, and the heels came with it. European noblemen saw them and immediately decided they looked powerful, which is the most aristocratic reaction imaginable. Men wore them first, especially rulers who wanted to look taller, richer, and more important than everyone else. Louis XIV practically turned heeled shoes into propaganda. Women adopted them later, and men eventually backed away. So yes, high heels began as combat technology before fashion turned them into chaos. 10. The Antikythera mechanism is one of those artifacts that makes you stare at history like it owes you an explanation. Found in a Roman shipwreck in 1901, It first looked like a corroded lump of bronze and bad luck. Then researchers discovered it was an analog computer from around the 1st century BCE. Not a decorative object, not a weird clock. A machine with interlocking gears designed to predict astronomical positions, lunar phases, eclipses, and even the schedule of ancient games. You turned a handle, and the device modeled the heavens. That is not normal behavior for a chunk of bronze pulled from the sea. The maddening part is that nothing this sophisticated appears again for more than 1,000 years, which strongly suggests it was not a one-time accident. The Greeks built something astonishingly advanced, then the knowledge slipped away, and modern people had to decode it with X-rays. History has genuinely misplaced some of its best homework. 11. Nanotechnology sounds like something invented by people in clean rooms wearing expensive goggles and speaking in grant proposals. But Roman glassmakers accidentally wandered into that territory about 1,700 years ago. The best example is the Lycurgus cup, made in the 4th century CE. At first glance, it just looks like a beautifully crafted Roman glass vessel. Then the light changes and the thing starts acting like wizardry. Viewed from the front, it appears green. Shine light through it, and it glows a rich red. The reason is that the glass contains microscopic particles of gold and silver, tiny enough to affect light in ways the Romans definitely could not explain. Modern scientists only figured out the effect in the 1990s using electron microscopes. So, Roman artisans were manipulating matter at the nanoscale by accident and still produced an object that feels more advanced than it has any right to be. Sometimes history stumbles into genius and leaves us to deal with it. 12. Sharks are so old that calling them ancient barely covers the insult. These things have been in the oceans for more than 400 million years. To put that in perspective, trees showed up around 350 million years ago. So yes, sharks are older than trees, which sounds fake but is deeply real. They were already patrolling the seas tens of millions of years before the first forests existed. And the weird timing keeps going. Saturn's rings are thought to be relatively young on a cosmic scale, possibly only 100 to 400 million years old, meaning there were sharks before Saturn looked the way it does now. Sharks survived multiple mass extinctions, including the one that erased the dinosaurs. They watched continents split, animals crawl onto land, and evolution throw out endless bizarre experiments. And sharks mostly just kept doing shark things because apparently perfection does not need a redesign. 13. Contact lenses feel like peak modern optics, the kind of thing that should arrive after laboratories, polymers, and people brave enough to touch their own eyeballs. But the core idea goes back to Leonardo da Vinci in 1508. He was not setting out to invent contact lenses exactly, because Leonardo never did anything the simple way. He was studying how vision worked and sketched the idea that putting water directly against the eye could change how it refracted light. That is the basic principle sitting underneath contact correction. Later thinkers pushed it further. René Descartes imagined a liquid-filled tube against the cornea in 1636, and Thomas Young tested related ideas on his own eye in 1801, which is both scientific and slightly unhinged. Practical glass lenses appeared in the late 19th century, and comfortable versions took much longer. But the original insight came centuries earlier, because of course, Leonardo had already been there first. 14. Ice cream in the desert sounds like a sentence that should end with the words, "absolutely not." Ancient Persia ignored that and did it anyway. By around 400 BCE, Persians had built ingenious cooling structures called yakshals, massive domed buildings designed to store ice through brutal summer heat. Their walls were made from a special insulating material, and the architecture used shade, airflow, and nighttime cooling so effectively that ice could survive underground for months. Ice was collected in winter, stored carefully, and later mixed with rosewater, saffron, and fruit to make chilled desserts such as faluda, which still exists in Iran today. No electricity, no refrigerants, no humming freezer in the corner. Just architecture, physics, and a refusal to accept warm dessert as a fact of life. While many ancient societies were trying not to melt, Persian elites were eating frozen treats in the middle of desert heat. That is not luxury. That is engineering with attitude. 15. Nintendo feels like a company that should have appeared sometime after televisions, arcades, and children started arguing over controllers. Instead, Nintendo was founded in 1889, which is the kind of date that makes your brain trip over itself. The Eiffel Tower had just opened. Queen Victoria was still alive. The Ottoman Empire still existed. And in Kyoto, Fusajiro Yamauchi started a business making handmade hanafuda playing cards. These were not standard Western cards either. They featured flowers, seasons, and animals, and were often used for gambling games the government had repeatedly tried to suppress, because governments have always been bad at stopping fun. For decades, that was Nintendo's world. Cards, later some toys, and a lot of patience. Video games did not enter the picture until the 20th century, much later. So when you pick up a Nintendo console, remember you are dealing with a company old enough to have watched modern entertainment reinvent itself several times. 16. Texting feels welded to smartphones, terrible autocorrect, and group chats that should have ended 3 hours ago. But the basic idea is much older. When Samuel Morse demonstrated the electric telegraph in 1837, he essentially created the first system for sending short written messages across long distances using electrical signals. That is texting with wires, a dress code, and less punctuation. People quickly developed abbreviations and shorthand because every extra word cost time and money, which means even the urge to compress language into efficient little chunks is not remotely new. Businesses used telegraphy for urgent updates, newspapers spread breaking news through it, and people conducted long-distance relationships with nothing but brief coded messages and a lot of emotional stamina. By the 1850s, cables even ran beneath the sea. So modern texting is not some revolutionary new behavior. It is the telegraph with better speed, worse spelling, and an alarming number of emojis. 17. Brain surgery sounds like the kind of thing humanity should have attempted only after sterile tools, scans, and several centuries of medical regret. Apparently, Stone Age people disagreed. More than 7,000 years ago, humans were performing trepanation, the process of cutting or drilling holes into the skull. Archaeologists have found skulls from many regions with neat openings that are clearly not random damage. And the truly wild part is that many patients survived. You can tell because the bone shows healing, meaning these people lived long enough for the skull to begin repairing itself. Why they did it is still debated. It may have been used to treat head trauma, reduce pressure, or drive out evil spirits depending on the culture. The tools were stone. The setting was prehistoric. The anesthesia situation was basically terrible. And yet survival rates were sometimes surprisingly high. Ancient people were doing skull surgery before writing existed, which is both impressive and deeply unsettling. 18. Robots feel like they belong to the age of computers, code, and machines that politely threaten to replace everyone. But ancient engineers were building mechanical wonders long before that. Around 400 BCE, the Greek thinker Archytas created a wooden pigeon that could propel itself using steam or compressed air. It may have only flown briefly, but that still makes it one of the earliest known self-moving machines. Then, centuries later, in the 12th century, Al-Jazari took the whole idea to another level. He designed programmable automata, including a boat carrying 4 mechanical musicians whose rhythms could be changed by moving pegs on a rotating drum. That is basically medieval programming with better costumes. He also built an automatic hand-washing servant, fountains that changed behavior, and devices powered by crank systems. Ancient robotics was not about consciousness. It was about mechanical brilliance and pure showmanship. These inventors were flexing on the future with gears. 19. Rap battles feel modern because everything sounds more modern once microphones and internet comments get involved. But insult contests in verse are ancient, and the early versions were gloriously vicious. Among Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, there was a tradition called flighting, where 2 opponents traded elaborate verbal attacks in front of an audience. Imagine a public roast, but everyone is armed and the consequences feel a little more immediate. These exchanges often happened at feasts, because apparently food and humiliation have always worked well together. The insults could target cowardice, family background, honor, intelligence, and basically any weakness available. The goal was to destroy your opponent's reputation so thoroughly that actual violence almost became optional. Norse literature is packed with examples, including moments when gods got involved and started insulting everyone in sight. So no, lyrical trash talk is not a modern invention. Warriors were doing competitive verbal destruction over 1,000 years ago, likely while extremely drunk. 20. Woolly mammoths. Feel like creatures from a world so distant that humans should barely overlap with them at all. But some mammoths survived far later than most people realize. A small, isolated population lived on Wrangel Island in the Arctic until about 2000 BCE. That means mammoths were still wandering around while ancient Egypt was already building monuments and managing actual civilization. Picture workers hauling stone for the Great Pyramid while, somewhere far to the north, mammoths were still existing like history had not gotten the memo. These island mammoths were smaller than their mainland ancestors, which is a common island adaptation because nature loves turning huge animals into compact versions of themselves. They likely disappeared because of inbreeding, limited resources, or human arrival. Either way, mammoths and pharaohs were not separated by some unimaginable abyss. They shared the planet. History gets much weirder once you stop arranging everything into neat little boxes. 21. The steam engine is usually treated like the glorious starting gun of the Industrial Revolution, all smoky factories and 18th century ambition. But the core idea existed in the 1st century CE. Hero of Alexandria built a device called the Aeolipile, and it was absolutely a real steam-powered rotary engine. A cauldron heated water into steam, the steam entered a hollow sphere, and jets escaping through bent tubes made the sphere spin. The principle is clear, elegant, and maddeningly early. So why did ancient Rome not end up with locomotives, factories, and very stressed accountants? Because the machine was mostly treated as a clever novelty or temple curiosity. Cheap labor made large-scale mechanization less attractive, especially in a society heavily dependent on slavery. The technology existed, the economic incentive and broader vision did not. Humanity had steam power sitting right there and basically used it to impress people, instead of transforming industry. That is classic history. 22. Central heating sounds like the sort of comfort modern civilization had to invent after centuries of freezing in badly built houses. Yet both the Romans and Koreans were already far ahead, and they got there by different routes. The Roman hypocaust system raised floors on little pillars and sent hot air from a furnace underneath, warming rooms from below. Wealthy Romans had heated floors while plenty of later Europeans were still pretending a smoky fireplace counted as progress. In Korea, the Ondol system sent heat and smoke from a kitchen fire through channels beneath the floor before venting it outside. It kept homes warm efficiently, spread heat evenly, and remained part of Korean life for more than 2,000 years. Both cultures understood something obvious in hindsight. Warm floors are smarter than just heating air and hoping for the best. Then much of the world wandered away from that insight for ages. Medieval drafts won for far too long. 23. Oxford University is so old that comparing it with other ancient things starts feeling unfair. Teaching there began around 1096, which means students in England were already attending lectures long before the Aztec Empire even existed. The Aztecs founded Tenochtitlan around 1325, more than 2 centuries later. So yes, classrooms at Oxford were active while one of the most famous empires in the Americas was still in the future. That timeline sounds wrong until you sit with it and accept that history is constantly messing with scale. Oxford also predates the full rise of many things people assume are ancient staples of the medieval world. When scholars were arguing in Oxford, the world map still had entire chapters left to write. It is strange because universities feel modern in structure, while the Aztecs feel deeply ancient in imagery. But chronology does not care about vibes. Oxford was already old before the Aztec state even got started. 24. submarines feel like they belong to steel hulls, engines, sonar, and serious military budgets. Yet the first working submarine arrived in 1620, built by Dutch inventor Cornelis Drebbel. His machine was basically a wooden frame wrapped in greased leather, rowed underwater by a crew of 12 men. Which sounds less like cutting-edge technology and more like a dare someone should have rejected immediately. But it worked. Drebbel demonstrated the craft on the River Thames for King James I, reportedly diving about 15 feet deep and traveling a considerable distance beneath the surface. The huge mystery is how the crew managed the air. Some accounts claim Drebbel used a chemical method to refresh oxygen, which would be absurdly ahead of its time. Others suggest simpler solutions like air tubes. Either way, the king watched a leather-coated boat vanish underwater and return later. 4 centuries before nuclear submarines, somebody had already cracked the basic concept. 25. General anesthesia feels like one of the clear dividing lines between modern medicine and old-school horror. But in China around 200 CE, Surgeon Hua Tuo was already performing operations on patients who had been rendered insensible to pain. He reportedly used a preparation called mafisan, often described as a mixture involving cannabis and wine. Patients drank it, lost awareness, and allowed him to perform abdominal surgery and other serious procedures that would otherwise have been a nightmare for everyone involved. Then, history pulled its favorite trick and lost the recipe. Hua Tuo was executed by a warlord he had treated, and according to later tradition, the formula vanished with him. Effective anesthesia in Western medicine did not properly emerge until the 1840s with ether and chloroform. So for more than 16 centuries, humanity had discovered a way to perform painless surgery, misplaced it, and then had to reinvent it from scratch. That is a brutal administrative failure. 26. The fax machine feels like one of those sad office survivors from the late 20th century, humming quietly in a corner out of pure spite. But the idea is much older than people think. In 1843, Scottish inventor Alexander Bain patented a system for sending images over wires. That was decades before the telephone became a practical reality. Bain used synchronized pendulums and chemically treated paper to transmit visual information through telegraph lines. It was clunky, but it worked, which is honestly all old inventions ever ask for. Then, in the 1860s, Giovanni Caselli improved the idea with the pantelegraph, a device capable of sending handwritten messages and signatures between cities such as Paris and Lyon. So while people imagine faxing as ancient office misery from recent memory, the technology actually belongs to a much earlier world. Documents were traveling across long distances before normal voice calls ever did. The fax machine really was ahead of its time and then refused to leave. 27. Dentistry is usually about fixing things after sugar, and poor judgment have done their damage. But among the ancient Maya, dental work could be purely cosmetic, and they were absurdly good at it. Mayan specialists drilled tiny holes into front teeth and inserted gemstones such as jade, turquoise, or obsidian, turning smiles into luxury displays. This was not random hacking by amateurs either. The precision was remarkable. They used drills made from hard stone tubes, likely operated with a bow mechanism, and managed to decorate teeth without usually hitting the pulp, the sensitive inner area that would have made the whole process a screaming disaster. The adhesive was a durable cement made from natural materials and held the stones in place for years. Modern analysis of Mayan remains shows real technical skill and a clear understanding of tooth structure. Long before braces or whitening strips, the Maya were already treating teeth as jewelry. That is commitment to aesthetics. 28. In the 1st century CE, Hero of Alexandria built what was basically the world's first vending machine, which means even ancient temples were experimenting with automated transactions. His device dispensed holy water. You put in a coin, the coin dropped onto a lever, the lever opened a valve, and a measured amount of sacred water flowed out. Once the coin slipped off, the valve closed again. Clean, clever, and very convenient for priests who were probably tired of worshippers trying to get blessings on a discount. The machine was installed in temples in Egypt, and it solved a very old human problem by introducing a very old human solution. Pay first. Hero was a ridiculous overachiever, by the way. The same man also designed automatic doors and a steam-powered spinning sphere because apparently he woke up every day determined to outdo the century. Modern vending machines just sell chips. Heroes sold religion with precise engineering. 29. Flamethrowers sound like a terrible idea that only industrial warfare could have produced. But the Byzantine Empire was using something even more terrifying in the 7th century. Greek fire was a mysterious incendiary weapon projected through tubes, often from ships, and it had one very rude feature. It burned on water. So if your ship caught fire at sea, the sea itself stopped being comforting and started joining the attack. Enemy crews watched flames cling to the surface and keep burning, while panic did the rest. The exact formula was guarded as a state secret, and when Byzantium eventually fell, the recipe vanished with it. Modern guesses include petroleum, sulfur, and quicklime, but nobody knows the full truth. Greek fire helped protect Constantinople through major sieges and worked as a kind of medieval superweapon. It was not just destructive, it was psychologically horrifying. The Byzantine navy basically weaponized nightmare fuel and then took the instructions to the grave. 30. Earthquake detection sounds like something that should require electronics, graphs, and a machine covered in modern seriousness. Then along comes Zhang Heng in 132 CE and makes the whole timeline look silly. He created a bronze vessel about 6 feet across, decorated with dragon heads around the outside, each holding a bronze ball above a wading toad. Inside was a mechanism sensitive enough to respond when an earthquake occurred far away. When the internal motion was triggered, one dragon released its ball into the mouth of the toad below, indicating the direction of the disturbance. It was elegant, theatrical, and completely unlike anything most people imagine for the 2nd century. According to historical reports, the device once registered a quake so distant that nobody in the capital felt it. Later, messengers arrived confirming the event. 17 centuries before modern seismographs, China had earthquake detection using dragons, toads, and mechanical genius. History really does not care what feels modern. 31. Sunglasses seem like a very modern mix of fashion, celebrity avoidance, and pretending eye contact is optional. But people have been shielding their eyes for centuries, just for very different reasons. In 12th century China, judges wore smoky quartz lenses during court proceedings, not to block sunlight, but to hide their expressions. The goal was to stop anyone from reading their reactions while testimony was being heard. That is less beach accessory and more emotional firewall. Long before that, Inuit communities in the Arctic carved goggles from bone or ivory with narrow slits that reduced glare from snow. No tinted lenses needed, just smart design and a brutal environment. Then in 18th century Venice, tinted glass helped gondoliers deal with sunlight bouncing off the water. Fashion sunglasses only really exploded in the 20th century, thanks to Hollywood and military use. But the basic idea is ancient. People have wanted eye protection and strategic mystery for a very long time. 32. Automatic doors feel like pure modern convenience, something that depends on sensors, electricity, and people becoming too lazy to touch handles. Hero of Alexandria had a version in the 1st century CE, and it was gloriously dramatic. His system was built for temples. A priest lit a fire on an altar outside, and the heat caused air in a hidden chamber to expand. That pressure pushed water into a suspended container, and the added weight pulled ropes that opened the temple doors. When the fire went out, the water drained back and the doors slowly closed again. To anyone watching, it looked like the gods had personally approved the ceremony and opened the sanctuary on cue. In reality, it was engineering doing theater. Ancient priests were not just spiritual figures, they were also running special effects with physics, ropes, heat, and excellent timing. Motion-activated doors are modern. Doors opened by ritual science are much older and way more stylish. So now the real question: what ancient flex did we miss that deserves a spot here? And which one in this video messed with your brain the most? Drop it in the comments because the best additions usually come from people who know one absurd fact the internet somehow forgot. And if this video earned a laugh or a double take, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more history being way weirder than it should be.